He was kneeling on the stone floor, chained like a beast, but there was something in the way he held his gaze that made me forget for a moment who I was. His face was covered in dust and dried blood, lips cracked, breath heavy, but his eyes belonged to someone who doesn't beg. And that disarmed me more than any sword ever could. There was no humiliation in him. There was defiance. Not with words, not with gestures, but with silence. The kind of silence that shouts louder than any war cry. My heart pounded so fiercely I feared the guards might hear it. I should have turned away. I should have walked off with the same disdain I'd been taught to harbor for the sons of the South, those so-called rebels threatening our kingdom's peace. But my feet didn't move. It was as if my entire body recognized something. My mind still refused to accept. He was Kael Draven, son of the man who tried to burn our fortress to the ground. The same name I'd heard cursed in secret councils. The same one my father said would one day have his head displayed in the square as a trophy. And yet there he was, so human, so real. I wanted to believe it was just shock affecting me, but there was something more, something in the way he looked at me, as if he saw through the veils, the brocades, the practiced posture, as if he saw the girl behind the princess. The girl who lay awake at night, hearing the screams of wounded men beyond the walls, wondering if there was truly honor in it all. For the first time, I didn't feel noble, nor the king's daughter. I felt exposed. Seeing him there, broken, yet whole, condemned yet proud, stirred a restlessness that burned beneath my skin, one I could no longer silence, and it was there, in that suspended moment between duty and desire, that something in me shattered. What was born in its place was dangerous, real, alive. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat before the mirror, still dressed in the day's clothes, as if shedding them would betray what I'd felt when I faced him. His face wouldn't leave my mind, not for its rugged beauty, nor for the strangeness of his presence in my castle, but because, for the first time, I felt someone saw me, not as a title, not as a symbol, but as a woman, a restless soul. Someone who was also imprisoned, even if without visible chains. The castle walls, which had always offered protection, began to feel like bars. The halls I once crossed with elegance now echoed with emptiness. Because while everyone celebrated the capture of an enemy, I questioned the war itself. What had he done, after all, to deserve the hatred his name carried? I'd grown up hearing stories told by men on thrones, but who tells the other side's version? No one ever answered that. No one ever wanted me to ask. By morning, I returned. To the dungeons. I told the guard it was to inspect security, a flimsy excuse, and he knew it. But no one dares defy a princess. The corridor was colder, or perhaps it was me. When I reached his cell, he was already standing, as if he knew I'd come. There were fresh cuts on his face, and a bruise spread across one of his ribs. The soldiers hadn't shown mercy. And yet, he looked at me the same way. No plea, no hatred, just presence. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. I took a moment to answer, not because I didn't know, but because speaking the truth aloud frightened me. Because the answer was too simple for everything I carried. Because you stayed. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have sat on the cold floor outside, his cell. I shouldn't have asked his full name, or listened to the story of his mother, killed by northern arrows during a flight with children. I shouldn't have stayed silent as he spoke of a people who only wanted land to farm, and children who wouldn't be born to fight. But I did all of it, and when I returned to my chambers that night, I was no longer the same. Nor was he, nor were. With the nights that followed became a dangerous habit. I made excuses, late meetings, routine inspections, a sudden interest in kingdom security. But the truth was, I needed to see him. I needed that low voice telling stories that contradicted everything I'd been taught. I needed that gaze that didn't bow, didn't flatter, just saw me with a clarity that hurt. Jonas, my personal guard, began to suspect. I saw it in his eyes, the hesitation, the lingering looks, the way he always stayed close. He owed me loyalty, but he wasn't blind. He knew what this could become, or worse, he knew it already had. And on a gray afternoon, he pulled me aside. "You're forgetting who he is," he said, his voice thick with concern. But he was the one who didn't understand. I wasn't forgetting. I was finally remembering who I was before the jewels, before the dresses, before royal councils and blood alliances. Kael asked for nothing. Not freedom, not pity. Sometimes he just fell silent while I spoke. Other times, he questioned with simple words that pierced me like arrows. "Why does your peace demand so much blood?" he asked one night, his eyes locked on mine. I didn't know how to answer. Not because there was no answer, but because no answer justified it. I saw him stagger one day, bleeding internally, and I demanded they let me into his cell with a healer. The king never knew. The whole castle believed the enemy was rotting in the dungeons, but the truth was different. He was resisting. And with each day, something in me leaned closer to him. Something I couldn't name, but that grew like an ember, kept secret, until one night he touched my hand. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but the warmth of that touch stayed with me for hours. There was no kiss, no promise, just the contact, real, unexpected, and dangerous. Because that same night, as I climbed the tower stairs, I found my father waiting for me, alone, silent, and with a look I knew all too well. He knew. He didn't say my name. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on me as if they saw beyond my body, beyond my princess garb, beyond my royal blood. My father was always a man of few words, but when he fell silent, it was worse. His silence cut deeper than any shout. I stood still, like a child caught in a sin I hadn't even committed, and yet already condemned. "You've been frequenting the lower parts of the castle lately." The words came dry, yet heavy with a weight that tightened my chest like an invisible chain. I swallowed hard. I didn't confirm, didn't deny. I just met his gaze with the same eyes I'd inherited from him, eyes that now dared to be different. He stepped closer, slowly, like a predator still deciding whether to strike or forgive. "You don't understand what that man represents," he said. "His family killed our allies, burned villages, spilled innocent blood. I wanted to ask if our own hadn't done the same, if our army's arrows spared children, if our knights knew the difference between vengeance and justice." But I didn't speak, because doubting wasn't allowed, not even for a princess. "You carry this kingdom's name, Seraphina," he continued, quieter now, as if trying to contain something within him. "And a princess who lies with the enemy is a greater threat than he could ever be." The words struck like blades, and for the first time I saw him not as king nor as father, but as a man who couldn't accept that his daughter thought differently from him, loved differently from him. He sent me to my chambers and ordered that I never be left alone. Jonas was replaced. Doors creaked twice before opening, as if warning the palace spies that I was breathing. Kael's cell was locked inside and out, and I was kept away. But what my father didn't understand was that it was too late. There was no separating my body from what my heart had already chosen. And so Act 1 ended, with an invisible wall rising between me and everything I believed to be true. and with a forbidden love burning silently beneath the ashes of obedience. I was locked in gold, and there's no crueler prison than one that glitters. My chambers were fortified, my maids replaced, my steps watched by eyes that feigned respect but carried suspicion. From the outside, I was still the princess, pristine, elegant, untouchable. But inside, something in me was being suffocated, like a flower outgrowing the vase it was placed in. And the more they tried to silence me, the louder my silence grew. I thought of him every night, wondered if they'd worsened his pain, if the chains were tighter, if his eyes still shone as they had the day he brushed his fingers against mine. Wondered if he missed me, or if, like me, he already knew what was between us was irreversible, even without a name, without promises, without a future. In the court, conversations changed. The looks weren't the same. The air was thick, heavy with omens. A new marriage was suggested, this time with urgency. The suitor's name hardly mattered, just another face chosen to stop the rumors, to erase the stain. They wanted me to accept, as if there wasn't blood on my hands for loving an enemy. But that's exactly how they made me feel, dirty, corrupted, traitor. One morning I received a letter. No seal, no signature, few words. He's still alive, but not for long. My body trembled, not from fear, but from the confirmation of what I already knew. They were preparing his execution, in secret, away from the court, away from the people, silent, as if they could kill an idea without leaving a trace. I ran through the corridors aimlessly, as if my soul were trying to escape before my body could be stopped. I sought Jonas. He wasn't expecting me. His eyes carried guilt, his mouth silence. "I can't help you," he whispered. But the way he averted his gaze told me everything. He knew. He knew where Kael was. He knew when. He knew how. And I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I would lose him, not by accident, but by the choice of men who mistake power for fear. And this, time. I wouldn't stand still. I stole the plainest dress I could find, hid my face under a servant's veil, and left the castle before the sun touched the walls. My heart pounded like a war drum. Every step was an affront, every breath, silent cry against everything I'd been taught. But I could no longer pretend to be just the obedient daughter of a king. Not after loving with my eyes, not after touching the truth with my hands. I followed the clues Jonas had carefully left. He didn't help with words, but he opened doors. Doors that only open when duty wrestles with conscience. I passed through empty corridors, hidden stairways, and rooms I never knew existed until I reached the fortress's depths. The smell of dampness and iron enveloped me before I even heard his breathing. He was there, bound, wounded, but not surrendered. Still with that same gaze, more tired, yes, but still brimming with dignity. When he saw me, he said nothing, and that silence broke me more than if he'd begged, because he didn't expect to be saved. He expected to be forgotten. I knelt before him, touched his wrists, and felt the bruised flesh under my hands. "I came to get you out of here," I whispered. He closed his eyes, and for a moment I saw the weight of war, imprisonment, waiting, all collapsing within him. But when he opened his eyes again, there was something more, a spark, and this time he spoke. "If you cross this line, Serafina, there's no going back." "I know," I replied, and I did. This wasn't just an escape, it was a declaration, a deep cut with the past, and when I unlocked the chains and saw his hands free for the first time, I understood I wasn't just freeing him, I was freeing myself too. We fled through the old servant's roots, paths buried beneath the castle's history. There was running, there was fear, But there was also silence between us, the kind of complicit silence that only exists between two people who no longer need to explain themselves. We hid in the shadows of an abandoned cabin beyond the hills. There, for the first time, we stood face to face without bars, without titles, without masks. And he kissed me. Not like someone celebrating, but like someone surviving. Like someone needing to touch life, to be sure it still existed. And that night, under a sky that seemed to know more than we did, Cale told me what no one had ever dared to say. The war dividing our kingdoms began with a lie, and my father was at its center. I stayed silent for a time even the stars couldn't measure. Those words weighed like swords on my skin, cutting not my body, but the image I'd carried my whole life. My father, the same man, who taught me to pray, who made me repeat that good would always prevail, who raised statues for honor and walls for lies, was behind the conflict that claimed hundreds of lives. Kyle didn't speak with hatred. There was no venom in his voice. Just pain, an old, almost resigned pain. He didn't want me to hate my father. He wanted me to know, to see, to decide what to do with it, like someone offering the truth with open hands, even knowing they might be rejected for it. It was he who invaded first, he said. Your father wanted the South's lands, the water, the fields, said it was for security, that we were a threat, but we weren't. I saw it. I was a child. The ground vanished. Beneath me. Not because I couldn't imagine it, but because deep down I'd always known. The official story always felt too neat, too heroic. Victories always came with more silence than celebration. And my father, he was always afraid of questions. I looked at Kael and saw a man who'd lost brothers, land, name. And yet there he was, whole before me, offering what no one else had, the courage to the truth. The next morning we rode together. There was no safe hiding place anymore. The castle would know of the escape, borders would be sealed, and my name, which once opened doors, would now be a sentence. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what we carried between us, a love, born from the impossible, a truth that could change history, and a destiny that no longer accepted chains. With the weight of truth on our backs, the crown's name dissolving behind me, and my heart moving toward what was at last freedom, we were hunted. The echo of hooves behind us gave no rest, as if the kingdom itself had become a ravenous beast, determined to devour its rebellious daughter and the man who dared touch her heart. We slept little, ate less. At every bend in the path we expected an ambush, at every shadow the sound of steel. But something stronger than fear guided us, certainty. The certainty that there was no turning back, not for me, not for Kyle, not for the world as we knew it. We reached a forgotten village nestled in the mountains, where the king's name wasn't law, just a bitter memory. There, for the first time, I saw free faces, not because they'd never suffered, but because they'd chosen to bow their heads no longer. They confirmed everything Coyle had said. Tales of burned crops, treaties torn under false promises, children taken as bargaining chips. And it was there, amid the ruins of what was once part of my kingdom, that I made my choice. I wrote a letter, a confession, a denunciation, with my name, with my seal. Every word a stab at the image of the perfect daughter. Every sentence a farewell to the crown imposed on me as destiny. Kyle didn't stop me. He never tried to guide or mold me. He just stood by my side, as he always had, in silence, with that look that said, if we fall together. I sent the letter by a loyal messenger, and the next day everything changed. The bounty on Cale's head doubled, but mine was worth even more. We were officially traitors, enemies of the throne. But something unexpected happened. People began to rise, not for us, but for what we represented, for the truth, for the freedom to no longer accept the version of those who'd always ruled with fear. Act 2 didn't end with peace. It ended with the inevitable explosion of everything held back for too long, and I, Serafina of Almyra, renegade princess, was ready to face my own blood, to defend what my heart, at last, recognized as justice. The war didn't start with shouts. It started with eyes that opened. For the first time, people who called me princess began calling me by my name, Serafina. Just Serafina. And that gave me more strength than any army. The letter I wrote spread like wildfire. The royal seal at its end, my signature, my truth, left no room for the king to deny. The people began to talk, to question, to doubt. And in a kingdom like mine, doubt was more dangerous than a sword. Kyle stayed by my side, not as a shadow nor as a guide, but as an equal. Side by side, voices once silenced rose before us. Rebels who'd already lost everything, farmers who only wanted to plant in peace, deserting soldiers wounded by battles fought for lies. And so, without my realizing, the princess fell, and in her place rose a leader. The king's troops didn't take long to find us, but this time we didn't run. We armed ourselves with what we had: courage, truth, and the gaze of those who no longer accept living on their knees. When the war horn sounded, it wasn't for the crown. It was for justice. I faced my father in the open field. The man I once feared was now just flesh, bone, and pride. When our eyes met, there was no affection left, only the chasm that had opened between us. He tried to call me back, used my mother's name, said he could still forgive me, but I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for answers, and he had none. The battle was brief, because it was no longer a war of swords, but of versions. And the truth had already won in the people's hearts. When the castle gates opened, it wasn't through bloodshed, it was through surrender. My brothers didn't follow me, but those who mattered did, and that was enough. Kyle and I didn't take the throne. We didn't seek a crown nor a castle. We left others to rebuild what had been destroyed. We went south, to the land that was once his, to the land that was now ours. We built a house far from the shouts, close to the earth, where silence is a choice, not a prison. And every night, when I look at the man once called an enemy and feel his hand intertwined with mine, I remember that loving wasn't my ruin, it was my revolution. The name Serafina of Almyra is still spoken in the squares, but not as a princess, as a symbol. Some call her traitor, others visionary. But to me, I'm just a woman who chose not to repeat the lies she inherited. My father lost the throne, not by my hand. He lost it when he chose fear over truth. Kyle tills the land with hands that once wielded a sword, and I write, so our children will know that loving an enemy isn't weakness, it's courage. Because living under the weight of a name is easy. What's hard is abandoning it for something no one can take from you, the freedom to love with your whole heart. And if you ask me today what I am, I answer with pride. I'm not the king's daughter. I'm the wife of the man the world tried to erase. I'm the mother of a new story. And above all, I'm free. The end.